Good morning, afternoon, and evening, everyone. Today on the FPL Wire, we'll be wiring up with a very special guest who is currently ranked number 2 in the Fantasy Football Scout Hall of Fame. I'm your host, Zofa, and I'm joined as usual by my co host, Late Riser.
Hey Zoff, how's everything going? I'm so kicked for today because I think we just have an absolute banger of a guest who's been phenomenal in the past few years. I've been chatting with him on Twitter as well, and I hear that you've also been talking to him in the past few weeks a fair bit. So why don't you just go on and introduce him?
So, Tom, it's our pleasure to absolutely have you on over here. So, let me just tell you a little bit about him. Our guest, Tom Stephenson, aka FPL Badgers 9, is ranked second in the Scout Hall of Fame with 6 top 10K finishes and an average rank of 1147 over the last 3 seasons. Amazing. So he's one of the most consistent FPL managers around, and this consistency is all the more remarkable given the new influx of players in the game recently. Absolute honor to have you on here, Tom. How are you doing?
Tom?
Sorry, I was struggling to hear us off there. Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. A real pleasure. Watch the pods quite regularly. So, really a great honor to come on today.
The honor is all ours. So, how have you been finding it so far? You in the FPL mood yet, or just getting there?
Just getting there, I think. Obviously, there was the Euros. It was a pretty hard, long season due to the COVID impact last season. So, yeah, just starting to have a look at things, do a bit of planning, a bit of tinkering. So, starting to get back into it.
Everybody keeps talking about the number of players in the game increasing and it becoming a lot better, tougher to get the top 10K. And everybody's talking about how the top 50K or the top 60K is the new top 10K. And then this guy here, Tom, you managed to get an average rank of 1100 in the last 3 seasons. That just absolutely blows my mind. And especially in a season like last season, which was the COVID season, even the last season before that, it wasn't a normal season. How are you managing the consistency, Tom?
I mean, I don't think it's, one thing. I guess it's, lots of things that you try to do over the season. Just experience, try and be adaptable, try and be patient. There's a whole host of different things that I try to do over the years.
I can't wait to dive into it. So if you'll just plug the sponsors and then we'll get right into it.
Yeah, so let's just do the sponsor plug. Then I want to tell everyone about Tom's rank history because it really needs mentioning again. So a quick word about our sponsors. DreamSetGo is a global portal for fans to gain access to sporting events around the world. Accommodation, flight tickets, hospitality, stadium visits, everything can be tailored exactly to your requirements. They also do celebrity experiences, which include masterclasses with your favorite sports celebrity or something as simple as birthday shoutouts. You can find links to the products in the description below.
Also, just a little bit of an update on DreamSetGo. They've been working in the background and are in the midst of tying up with some absolutely awesome clubs where you can get travel packages to watch games in the second half of the season out there. So if there's any clubs that you are interested in to travel to in the UK, then let us know in the comments as well. We'll put out a tweet to get a feeler of this as well. Also, the FPL Wire is a part of the Fantasy Football Scout Network. All the stats that you see on our part are from Fantasy Football Scout. If you haven't already registered, now is the right time to get into it. I think they have a discount on as well. If you are registering for FF Scout, then make sure you're using the links in the description below. We're affiliate members, and it helps us as well. It helps us grow the channel. Also, we do have a Patreon as well. We switched it off last month, but they put it on again. It's simple. You can log on to patreon.com/the FPL Wire, and you can either pay £3 or £6 a month just to support us. There's no added benefits. All of our content is going to be free throughout the season. It's just in case you want to support us. We also have a league set up. The league code is something you can see on the screen. For our audio listeners, the league code is GKTIYM. We're in the midst of finalizing the prices that we have for the manager of the month as well as the person who wins the league. So make sure that there's some awesome prizes up for grabs. So make sure you're joining the league. I think that's it from me. Tom, I just want to get into talking to you and figuring out how the consistency comes. But tell us a little bit about how you fell in love with FPL and how long have you been playing fantasy sport?
I mean, I think we're coming into the 14th, 15th season now, so quite a long time. Obviously, really enjoy football, really into my football, really into sport in general. I also watch a lot of cycling, cricket, and pretty much any sport, to be honest. But in terms of the fantasy side of things, I guess it started when some friends were playing the game, and I was kind of encouraged to get involved, and then I obviously wanted to beat them, and then it kind of grew from there. Really enjoyed it. Was pretty casual, to be honest, at first, but over the years started to take it a bit more seriously, get really into it, and really enjoy it. But I play other fantasy games as well. I play fantasy cycling and different things across the season, but not to the same extent as FPL.
Are you as good at those as you are at FPL?
No, not really. Not really. I'll give it a go, but not so good.
But I'm just looking at your rank history here. I just want to go through it again. I think 2007, you probably started midway or a bit late. Then after that, it's 11K, 35K, 12K, 18K, 4K, 22K, 11K, 5K, 4K, 29K. And what is really interesting to me, the last 3 seasons, which I consider to be the most difficult, right? I've had some of my worst ranks over the last 3-4 years. And that's when you've achieved your best ranks, 1841, 375, 1225. What have you done different these last 3 seasons, you would say, from the years previous?
Yeah, so definitely for me, the last few years, I've started to take it a bit more seriously. I started to realize I was quite high up in the Hall of Fame, started to kind of, have a target to aim for. Maybe in prior years, I would relax a little bit near the end when I'd kind of got, done fairly well in my mini league. I was maybe top of that. So I started to really try and focus on, really driving right till the end and doing as best I could. So I think that's one of the biggest things. And then equally, I think I mentioned it before on some other pods that, I used to take quite a lot of hits, especially in those early days. And while I appreciate hits often can work, I just think that, you're up against some managers who don't take hits. And so at least thinking about trying to minimize it and making sure that if you do take hits, you're really trying to, get a really big benefit from that. And so I've kind of changed the way I play the game a little bit in the last couple of years.
So what changes have you made outside of the hits? How have you adapted?
I mean, I guess other things I've done, I definitely focus a lot more on captaincy. I never used to focus on that until right at the last minute. I'd spend the entire week fiddling around with my team, tinkering, working out what transfers I was going to do, get really into that. And then like 5 minutes before the deadline, I'd be like, oh, who's my captain? I wouldn't plan it. I wouldn't think about it. And now, definitely the last few years, I try to really think about who it's going to be, looking 6 weeks maybe in advance, starting to think that maybe I need to do a transfer for a captaincy option. And in particular, trying to cut out the more extravagant captaincy picks, which I know sounds a bit boring, but from my experience, I just kind of found that picking the premiums is generally the better move. You pay a lot of money for those guys and they're not the best value propositions in the game. And it just feels that if you're paying that much money, you should be utilizing those as much as possible. So now I really try to stick to the premiums, even if I want to go down a slight differential route. And obviously there'll be weeks where, there are different options on the table because maybe a host of the premiums, maybe you've got 2 premiums in your team and they both have really hard fixtures. Maybe they play each other. So that, those weeks are the opportunities I see to pick the differentials. But wherever I can, I do try to stick to the premiums. So last year, I definitely improved in terms of my captaincy.
Please elaborate on that.
Well, I think I ended up with about 650 captaincy points, which I think was very close to the guy who won it. I think he was about 665. So I don't think I played that well in many aspects of the game last year. I didn't use my chips particularly well. I think I got 9 points on my bench boost. I think I got 8 points on my triple captain. I used my free hit chip in a week, I think it was game week 18, where it wasn't really necessary. And I nose off, you absolutely smashed it in game week 29, where you got about 80 points and I was down on about 38. So there was a big error for me there. Equally, I didn't have Son at the start of the season. In fact, I did a kind of hokey pokey in managing to miss all his returns. Got him in, then he hauled when I didn't have him. Then I got him in again. Then he got injured, so I took him out. Then he hauled again.
The Mourinho lied at the middle as well. I remember
that. And I believed him, basically.
Yeah.
So like an idiot, I fell for that one, absolutely. And so after 3 game weeks, I was at 3.5 million. And like I say, the chip usage wasn't good. The thing that basically really saved me was the captaincy picks. So it really shows, if you focus on that, how that can save you or really push you forward. And I definitely never used to concentrate on that.
So how do you arrive at a captaincy decision? Are there any particular stats that you're monitoring week on week? What's the thinking? I'm guessing it must be a lot of Salah, Bruno, and Kane last season, primarily. But what's the process in making the decision?
I mean, I'll look at the stats. I'll try and look at the form. I'll try to obviously look at the fixtures are going to be the biggest driver. For me, fixtures drive a huge amount. We talk about form, but most form is driven by the fixtures. At the end of last season, Liverpool had looked pretty atrocious for large spells of last year. And suddenly they had a very appetizing fixture and a target to get into that 4th spot. And so it's no real surprise that then their players started delivering. And so it made sense there to load up on Liverpool players. And obviously Salah was being captained a lot by myself. Earlier in the season, I didn't have Kane very much. I think I had him for a handful of games. I did move to Kevin De Bruyne at a pretty good time. So I think around about game weeks 9-10, Man City had a really good run of fixtures. At that point, I brought in 2 Man City defenders and De Bruyne and captained him for a couple of games where he did well. And that set me in good stead. But yeah, generally, I'd say fixtures pretty much the most important. And then obviously I'll be keeping an eye on the stats. But to be frank, a lot of these premium players, you kind of know what you get from them. They've been doing it for a number of years. And while I appreciate that we may get other players that will start to, come onto our horizon of, the ones that we could choose. At the end of the day, you're paying the 12 million for those premiums. There's only really 3 or 4 of them at this stage. So yeah, that's kind of how I work on the captaincy.
Did you take into account home away last year? And if not, are you planning to take into account this year?
Yeah, home and away was almost pointless looking at last year. I mean, let's be frank. I think there was more away points than home points. And in particular, think of teams like Everton, like crazy, results in terms of, Everton, a team that I would normally think would have a big boost from their their home crowd, very intense crowd, close to the pitch, very loud, would normally have a big impact, and you'd expect their home form to be good. Last year, I think it was really bad, and their away form was what was doing it for them. So quite clearly, the fact that we had no crowd due to COVID was definitely a big impact. So am I looking to change that? I mean, I guess I am. I guess over the last year, I've really been looking, when I look at the ticker, I just look at the teams. I don't even look at whether it's home and away. Just go, okay, that they look good teams. I'll try and bring players in for that run. I guess now we'll be going back to what we used to do, where you're going, okay, that team's got 3 of the next 4 at home. And even though 1 or 2 of them might be slightly tricky, that home form is clearly a big advantage. I mean, I think under normal circumstances, if you have 2 evenly matched teams, the home team should normally win about 50% of the time. So it is clearly a big statistical advantage. So yeah, I guess I will start to think of that again. But yeah, it's quite hard to reset though, isn't it? After quite a long spell of doing things differently.
Absolutely. So how much content do you absorb? What is your process during the week? Do you listen? I know you listen to our podcast. Are there any ones you listen to? And how do you filter out the noise with just so much content out there these days?
Yeah, it definitely is difficult. I mean, I joined Twitter just over a year ago and started to really utilize the platform. And there's a lot of information. There's a lot of good information, but I guess there's also bad information. I try to, wherever I can, listen to 2 or 3 pods that I really can trust, where I respect the people that do it. So obviously yourselves, I listen to Black Box. I listen to the Double Up pod. I like FPL Heisenberg as well. But there's a host of other ones. Net the Hall is a new one that I enjoy. but generally probably 3 or 4 that I might try to listen to pretty regularly. And then there's a host of other ones that you can listen to because the content is very good. It's not like, if you just listen to these main ones, then that's it. There's a lot of good content out there. I think the hardest thing is scrolling through Twitter and not getting buried in all the information, because you can easily get involved in a lot of threads, get really into the detail, and a lot of time goes by, and it's pretty addictive, let's be honest.
And also there's a problem of stats, right? Stats can really be suited for any narrative. Anything you want to build, you can always look at the sample size and narrative. So are you a stats guy, or more of an eye test guy, a bit of both?
Definitely a bit of both. Until 1 or 2 years ago, I had really 2 ways that I would analyze things. I would either watch the games myself, which obviously isn't always possible. And then the other thing I would do would be to go onto things like the fantasy football forums, and I would just scroll down and I would absorb as much information as I could. I'd be listening to other people's opinions, their possible teams, looking at fixture runs that they talked about, and literally doing it that way to just build up information. Now, I guess it's, with Twitter, I definitely look at a lot of different content, but I look a lot more at the stats, in particular where I can't watch games. So if I can watch, a live game, I think the eye test is probably best. But given that these days, I don't know, if I think back last season, I probably watched like a third of the games. So realistically, it's not possible to really know what's going on in every game. So I would use the stats to try to help me to do that. So I'd be looking at things like XG, XA. I'd be looking at a whole wealth of stats sometimes, looking at penalty box touches, shots, big chances, things like that. But if you haven't got much time, then I would think that just looking at X goal involvement is a pretty good stat to go on. And while I appreciate it may not be perfect, I appreciate there are different models that look at the whole thing in a slightly different way. I think it gives you a good viewpoint that you basically wouldn't have otherwise. And like I say, you just can't watch every game. So I like to try wherever possible. I like to do both. I'd like to look at the stats and then have a look at the game and see, do I feel that player looks like he's got confidence, is doing the things that the stats suggest? But generally he should be, because it's quite unlikely that the two things are that far apart.
Yeah, I like it because you need to be comprehensive, right? Players could be taking shots which get blocked, taking speculative shots.
Yeah.
I think you need to look at the quality. I think you look at the quantity by the stats, and then you look at the quality in the eye test.
Yeah.
I think that sort of balances out. Do you use any of these algorithms? I know there are a lot of new ones that have come out. There's the FFS RMT, there's FPL Review, there's Fix. A lot of guys now do these machine learning concepts. Do you like that stuff?
Never used to be into it at all. Didn't even know what these things were doing. Last season, I started to get a little bit into it. So yes, I look at FPL Review. I look at FPL Optimize, which is run by a guy who's very, very bright and does some great stuff.
He's a great guy.
Exactly. There was a point a few months ago where he seemed to be bringing out a new feature almost every day. I mean, I don't know how he does it, but some of the things you can analyze are really interesting and really useful, I think. And yeah, FPL Review, it's interesting. Again, if you don't have time to watch the games, if you feel you want a bit of extra information, it's obviously it's another way of looking at things. So you get to the kind of expected points. And look, I appreciate there's going to be a subjective element in there. At the end of the day, those algorithms are looking at, what the expected points per minute is, and then what the expected minutes that player is going to play, and then probably applying a fixture difficulty rating to that as well. So you've got kind of 3 things, and all of those are relatively subjective. I mean, people maybe would argue that they're not, but some of those, it feels to me, would be. And so, yeah, I feel that sometimes if you know that a player was injured and you know for sure that he's going to be playing and that another player's injured, and so therefore he's playing 90 minutes, and maybe the algorithm hasn't updated because you've literally just got that information. So I think you can sometimes factor in more information from other sources, but as a general concept, I think it's pretty solid in giving you a good kind of grounding of what roughly you would expect from certain players over a certain period of time.
Right. And
Tom, take me through the process of all of this? Let's say a game week commences on a Friday night nowadays, and I'm assuming you must have seen maybe 1 or 2 games by Sunday evening. Probably caught the highlights. How does the decision making happen
What, for the next week?
for the next week? So are you first watching the highlights and then diving into the stats? What's the process?
I will probably be watching the games while tinkering with my team, getting excited about possibilities just as things change. Obviously, I try to never actually do transfers at that point, but it's kind of good fun to just tinker your team. I mean, I'll set up my team for next week as in the first place, just in case I get run over, and then I guess, yeah, at the start of the season, I'll approach things very differently to at the end of the season. So at the start of the season, obviously you've got a lot of active players, 8 or 9 million players. So you're going to get the price rises and price drops. They're much more extreme, and it's much more important to be aware of what's going on. And that's how I play anyway, in terms of trying to build value and avoid value destruction. So I'll keep an eye basically on what the different websites say, who's going to go up, who's going to go down, and I'll start to think about whether I want certain players, if I need to swap a certain player to make something work. So maybe I'm looking at doing 2 or 3 transfers. Obviously, sometimes that's manageable. You can hold off depending on what the situation is. Sometimes you need to very quickly act. And so I'll be looking at these things, and I guess there's a whole host of decisions that you make at the start of the season that you don't really think about and you don't really see, but you're making all the time, every night almost, to just decide whether you want to move on certain players or you don't. And I guess as far as I can, I'll try and hold off to later in the week, to hopefully where there are no more games and you hopefully get the press conferences at the end of the week. And in the meantime, I'll try and look at some stats, listen to some pods, try and hear some viewpoints of other people that might have watched the game a lot more in depth than I have for different games, because highlights aren't always the best. If you might see certain games for literally 5 minutes, you're really not going to get that much insight sometimes on certain teams and players. So I'll try and gather that information, and then towards the end of the week, if you can reach the press conferences on that, the day before the games, then that is definitely useful. And try to hold off on the transfers as long as possible, unless you really have to move because it's a necessity.
What I'm understanding here, sorry, Zoff, I just want
No
to
problem.
ask him the question. So basically what I'm understanding is, as soon as the game refreshes, you're set your team up for the next week. So you're already thinking about the moves that you're going to make. And I'm guessing, let's say on a Sunday night, a player is going to rise and you're interested in that player. You will have consumed the data and looked at the stats before making that move on a Sunday night?
Sometimes, probably not. I mean, that sounds way too simplistic, and I think sometimes, but I will, if I know that there's a particular player that I'm now interested in, I will try to research that player as quickly as possible. Obviously, if the different sites show that he's going up quite soon, it means I need to start thinking about that, diving into the data, listening to people's opinions, trying to look at the highlights, and trying to focus on that player sooner. So hopefully that's not the case, and hopefully he's not rising on the Sunday. And to be frank, in some cases, if that is happening, you just have to let the player go, because it feels time before the next game week to be making the moves. But I'm not going to lie, I've probably done it over the years. I've probably made some really silly moves, but yeah, generally now I will try to hold off at least in the middle of the next week, and where they definitely haven't got another game, you minimize the chance they're going to get an injury during the week. All these things can happen. Obviously, we've got COVID still. Who knows if it's gone away for good? So there's a whole load of different things that can go wrong. And so trying to get closer to the end of the week is definitely preferable. And I know that with COVID, I know a lot of people are waiting right till the last minute. I'm so ingrained in this whole building the value thing. At the start of the season, there was a couple of cases where I made hits to bring players in. So I was so into that process and used to that I probably didn't adapt quickly enough to the reality. And did I get burnt? Probably a couple of times. But generally, as long as you've got kind of at least a decent bench, like at least one player who's decent on your bench, then I think you can get away with that sometimes. And yeah, but there's no exact science. As I say, earlier in the season, I'll act very differently to later in the season.
So since you're talking about buying players and there's so much noise around that, there's so much hype, how do you distinguish between a bandwagon and a form pick? Something I struggle with is to identify form versus just like, a bandwagon, a flash in the pan. How do you hop on and hop off at the right time? Because I'm sure that has been key to moving up the ranks for you. You're obviously getting on these players before they're becoming 80, 60, 70% template.
Yeah, I'm not sure I always do, if I'm really honest. If I look back at last season, Lingard is a really typical example. I literally bought Lingard when his run stopped, which was pretty much just because Rafinha got injured. And I think of the other ones, I think there was maybe a little bit of a bandwagon on Rafinha. Gundogan, obviously. I got on him halfway through. It helped with what happened with De Bruyne, and there was an injury there. So it kind of made sense a little bit more, but I wouldn't say I'm always the best. I think it's a really hard thing, like you say, to identify, whether it is the real deal. And sometimes I think it's just down to luck to some extent. Some players will, you could get on 10 bandwagons and just like 2 of them go on for 10 weeks and the other 8 may go on for 2 weeks. And knowing which is really difficult. But I would say, looking at something like Lingard, in hindsight, I know that some of you guys got on him, I think, a bit earlier. And I think you could kind of see the confidence that he had. And sometimes that's a big thing. Confidence is definitely really important when it comes to football, especially with attackers. And you could see how much he was enjoying his football. You could see how, he was kind of refreshed, the fact that he was no longer held back at a club where he didn't play. He was given this freedom. You could visibly see that. And I guess if you see a player that is looking like that, I'd say even if it is a bit of a bandwagon, just stay in there until it kind of stops, because it's amazing how long that can go on for. I mean, I would not have believed that Lingard's run would last as long as it did. He got an enormous amount of points. I think something like over 100 points in the second half of the season. I mean, it was a pretty amazing run. But at the start of that, I honestly would not have been able to forecast that.
It's interesting that you mentioned, that you were late on Lingard and you were late on Gundogan and you missed Son's points in the first 3 or 4 weeks. And that sort of builds the narrative in my head that, you didn't get onto a lot of these tricky things and still you were so consistent and managed to have a good finish through the season. And what stuck out is, I think the key move was getting those 2 City defenders in Gameweek 10, which set up a good base for your team week on week. So you don't always need to get onto the right bandwagons if you're just doing the consistent things right.
Speaking of bandwagons,
definitely. And I think I made a couple of good moves. I wildcarded early when my team was terrible. I had Dele Alli, I had Havertz, I had Werner, I had a whole load of unknowns. It wasn't particularly good. I wildcarded on game week 3, got Bruno in, got Calvert-Lewin in, who I thought I'm going to need probably for the long term. And then even though that wasn't perfect, that started to move me up. And then around game week 10, I think I'd got a midfield that was KDB, Salah, Bruno, Grealish and Son. And then Bamford and Calvert-Lewin up front, and then 2 like City defenders at the back. And that team felt like I was ahead of the game. I was almost like, it would be hard for anyone else to get that team, given the value that I'd created doing that early wildcard. And I felt that they were good players. They were going to get good points. I could almost just leave that then. And I was really happy with that team. And to be frank, I really wish COVID hadn't happened. I really wish we didn't have the international break, because I would have gone on a lot longer, probably getting more points. But you have to be able to adapt to what happens. And at the end of the day, a lot of different stuff happened after that point.
Yeah, I remember seeing that team when you had it, and I remember trying to see, and I was almost 1.5, 2 million short affording all of those players at that time. So I see what you totally mean about building value in the first half of the season. What's your take on EO? You must use live FPL like the rest of us, like a large. I'm still trying to understand how you hit these ranks, because I got to about 15k, and the problem is once I hit around the 10k, the ranks are so congested and the template is so strong. You have to identify, so you have to have a couple of differentials at least in your team, right? You can't just be 80-90% template and still be moving in that'll get you to about the 40-50k mark, I've noticed. But getting into those last 1k 2k spots, that's where the differentials come in. How do you manage those?
Well, EO, in terms of EO, I try to ignore it. I'm not going to say that I'm not influenced by it because that would probably be untrue. The reality is we're very aware that when certain premiums play certain teams, what the EO is going to be. I guess it's the weeks where 2 premiums have good games or none of the premiums have good games that you can really try to get the right captaincy. And I think from my captaincy score, it looks like generally I did a pretty good job of picking the right differential captains on those weeks. And I think that was really important and probably clawed back a lot of points that I may have lost in other areas. Other things, I mean, it's really hard to say, to be honest. Yeah, it's hard to put your finger on exactly what I did. For sure, I didn't take many hits. I think a lot of other people probably did.
How many hits? Last 3 seasons on average?
I think last season was like 9. I think the seasons before would have been about 6. Okay. So fairly low. I mean, not, there are people out there who do, none, 2, 3, not as good as that. But like I say, I do take the odd hit at the start of the season when I'm trying to build value. And I guess if you have like a double and you know that you can make the points back or something, then I guess there's a justification there as well. But outside of that, I really try to be quite cautious. And I know that that's not the way that a lot of people want to play, and it's pretty dull. And I know equally it doesn't always work like that. You could take a punt on things, and if you get it right, you can be 10, 20 points up. Equally, there's a lot of situations where you'll try to justify it by saying that I'm doing this for the long term. It's going to make my team better for 3 or 4, 5 weeks in a row. And actually it doesn't. But it's very hard to analyze that and go, actually, I made a mistake there. So I try to minimize it where I can with the realization that isn't, a die-hard rule.
That's interesting.
Tell me, when you're looking at the fixture ticker, how far are you planning? Are you looking at for the next 6, next 8, next 3?
No exact science. I'd say definitely not the next 3. That feels too fewer games. I think if you start planning 3 games and then it depends on your build of your team as well. If you've got a very balanced team, if you've got 10 players that are, you're not looking to move around and you're only looking to move around 4 or 5 players based on fixtures, you can obviously do it more frequently without hits. If you have less players that are, the core of your team and you're looking to move more players around, then I guess you're either going to have to do hits or you're going to have to look at a longer time horizon. So I would say probably 6 weeks as a minimum, but I will look for blocks. If a team's got 8 good fixtures in a row, I'll look at that block and try to target those. I mean, obviously it's quite unlikely, but I guess Liverpool at the start of this season, I mean, how many have they got? I'm looking at the season ticker now and I can see 5 out of the first 6 are great, but I think they've even got some, some ones after that. Yeah, look at them. They're 2 out of the first 8 are hard, basically. The rest are pretty good. So, I mean, if you can try and identify good blocks, 5 or 6 games, then that's going to put you in really good stead to identify players to target.
And you mentioned you looked at the fixtures. You looked at the stats, and you primarily look at expected data, XGI. When you're looking back at the stats, what kind of sample size are you comfortable with analyzing? Let's say we're 10 game weeks into the season.
Yeah, so it's a hard thing, obviously, isn't it? Because 1 or 2 games can be complete luck. Equally, you're often not in the position to have a whole season of data. And in particular, the problem is things change at clubs and with players so often. A player could have certain data, but then he's changed positions. He was a fullback, now he's a wing back. Now he's on set pieces, before he wasn't. Those changes mean that the data doesn't tell you that. You don't know the reasons why. So you just, the player's suddenly really good when actually now he's being played at fullback again. So you miss that point. So, there's a huge caveat when it comes to looking at the stats. You really have to think about what's going on with the player, with the team, and try to think of it all together. Just looking at the stats doesn't tell you the big picture. Doesn't tell you everything. So, definitely I would try to look at longer sample sizes. But obviously, we know at the start of the season, what can you do? You basically have the prior year's data and then your fixtures. And they're really the two things that you can use. And obviously your knowledge of what's happening with that team. Is the team playing, has the team got good fixtures? Is the team playing well? Is the player playing in the same position as before? Are there any injuries to other positions? There's a huge amount of factors that would influence that.
I think so. I think that what you're basically saying is the context of the player role is very important when you're looking at the stats. Simple as that.
Yeah, true.
Speaking of stats, Thomas, this is something you have to help me out with, and this is something I've really struggled with the last 3-4 years, and I see your playing style is very similar to mine. So tell me, how do you manage Pep Roulette?
Oh, I don't like it. So last season, as I said, I picked De Bruyne and Cancelo and Diaz. Cancelo was probably the least number of games because obviously there was some roulette still there. Diaz, it was kind of obvious fairly soon that he was the mainstay and the core person that Pep wanted to be in his defence. So I felt I'm much more comfortable paying 5.5 million for a player who is just, going to be there playing 90 minutes every week, not going to get you many attacking returns, but you know what you get with the clean sheets. He's going to get the odd bonus point as well. And that was kind of enough. I think he ended the season, I think it was 142 points, something like that, which, is okay. Yeah, 142. 5.5, that was good. He's 6 million now. 142, is that enough? I don't know.
I just love that you know off the top of your head that Diaz scored 142 points last season. I think that's just absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and Cancelo, 138. Similar type thing, but obviously Cancelo's minutes were far reduced. He's had a price rise as well. I'd be more concerned with Cancelo now. Zinchenko, I think, is a bigger possibility to play it at left back. And so is he going to share time with Zinchenko on one side and Walker on the other? Doesn't make me feel particularly comfortable. And then as for the attacking players, it's a very difficult thing, isn't it? I love Foden. I think he's brilliant. Mahrez is always looking good. Sterling, when he plays, you think he's gonna get points, but it's very hard to go for them. And I do generally try to avoid those players. I hate having players where you're waiting for the team sheet and then they're not in it. There's nothing worse when you're paying. It's okay if it's a defender and it's 5.5 million. It's another thing if you're there with a Mahrez this season, 9.5 million. I don't think I can be sitting there waiting to see is he playing or is he not. It just it grates me somewhat. So it's a difficult thing, and I definitely try to avoid it. Although I appreciate why some people like Pranil maybe would go for a few more adventurous picks.
That's a specialty. We were lucky last season. I think last season the lineups were a little bit settled and City weren't blowing teams away 5-0, 6-0. I remember that period, especially after the restart, where Sterling was just hitting hat tricks every other game. And I was still avoiding Man City players at that point with roulette, and it was really, really painful at times.
Yeah, I was listening to Tom here right now, and he was talking about how painful it is, and that statement that he said, where you don't like having players and worrying about the team sheet. And I remember you telling me that at least 5,000 times. I can't see Zofar on the screen right now, but I can just imagine him nodding like, yes, you're speaking to my heart right now, Tom.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. And look, it's not just Man City, is it? We see that with Chelsea now. Liverpool are not so bad at it, I guess, now with Jota, Firmino, Mane, Salah. Which three is he going to play? Is he going to play four? I doubt he plays four very often. Maybe against some of the really, poorer teams in the league, he really goes for it in those games. But generally, someone's going to miss out. And again, you look at the stats for Jota. The points per minute for Jota are fantastic. But again, you just don't know, do you? It's he's probably going to rotate with Firmino. Let's be honest here, and there's just nothing worse than having your player not play.
All right. I tend to fall into. Last season I fell into a lot of traps. Timo Werner being one. Any particular advice you have to FPL managers for traps to watch out for when they're playing the game? Some of the mistakes you see managers making.
I guess there could be quite a few, but definitely at the start of the season, going for players that are unproven is something I'm trying to personally avoid. and I haven't always been so good at this, as you can tell from my early wildcard last year, but definitely trying to stay away from the championship players, and it's not always possible. You're probably going to have the odd one or two. Generally, they're the cheaper players in the game, so it's understandable. But I think you don't really want a squad with 4 or 5 of those unknown players. And yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing.
Now, I feel bad for our listeners right now because the pod we had previous to this one was where we had Luke, FPL Aaron's, talking up and digging up all those championship players. And a lot of our listeners had 2 or 3 of those promoted team players in our draft. And now Tom here is telling us, try going with known quantities. So I think I just feel bad for our listeners.
But I think that's okay, because I think you just got to get a balance that you feel comfortable with. If you pick 2 or 3 of them, might be okay. I think if you've got 5 of them, I think, a lot can go wrong. Some of them will not shine as much as you think they will. Some of them may not get the minutes that you think they will, but that can be true for other players as well. So there's no definite rule with these things.
Right, so let's bring up your watch list, Tom. Let's now start talking specific to this season. I'm just going to bring your watch list up on screen, and let's start going through them position by position. Are you pretty set on your goalkeeper? You've highlighted Sanchez in the sheet you sent us.
I think so. He seems like he's underpriced for a Brighton defence that should be pretty good. Obviously, White going to Arsenal might have an impact, but I think generally they play a pretty consistent system. I don't see it changing too much. So I think he's good value at 4.5. Little bit concerned about the number of saves he'll make, because at the end of the day, as we kind of know with the goalkeepers, you don't always have to pick players from the big teams. They might get more clean sheets, but the teams further down the league will get more save points. So that they often offset somewhat, and it ends up being quite a small gap between the different goalkeepers. Obviously, last year was a bit of an exception. Martinez is on my list, really, because he was so amazing last year. 5.5, it's a big rise now. I mean, do I think he's going to get like 185 or whatever he got last year again? I probably not. If he got 150, 160, you'd still be thinking that was a good total. But I think Sanchez will get 140 at $1 million less. So I think Sanchez is a good one, but Backman comes into play as well, because I think they look the more defensive. Watford look more defensive of the 3 promoted teams. He'll probably get quite a few save points. So he'll probably be decent. I don't think, if you went for him, I wouldn't be too worried about that. Meslier, another quite good one, a little bit more expensive than Sanchez, but will Leeds be as tight as they were in the second half of last season? I'm not sure. It's hard to know. But yeah, definitely at 5. I think he's reasonable because he does make a lot of saves. So I'm pretty set on Sanchez, but I can appreciate that there are other possibilities here. And definitely the actual best goalkeepers, the ones who I think will get the most points, I think will be like Pope and Martinez. But at the end of the day, I don't believe there's a million difference between, say, a Sanchez and a Martinez.
Are you set and forget guy with your goalkeepers, or do you like to do this home away rotation with 2 4.5s? A lot of people do.
Absolutely not. I have done that in the past over many years, and it is extremely painful, and I don't think it works. The problem with the goalkeepers is often some of their really big points that they get in a game week can be when they play a really hard team. Because if they go, I don't know, like you're the Watford goalie, if they go away to Man U and they get a clean sheet, he's going to get like 11 points or something. He's going to get the clean sheet, he's going to get the bonus, he's going to get loads of save points. So suddenly you're missing out on a goalkeeper that gets 11 points because they were away at Man U. And while I appreciate it doesn't happen that often, it happens enough that I just think if you rotate them, you can easily just keep getting the dull scores where you might get the odd clean sheet, but that's not enough. And you're missing out on these big totals. So, and equally, you have to remember you're paying more money to do that. So if you're paying 9 million, 9.5 million, etc., I don't think that's necessary. I think you can get pretty much the same total by paying 8.5 million, 9 million.
Yeah, it happens pretty often at Old Trafford, to be fair, right, Ella?
Yeah. Some of the biggest goalkeeper hauls, especially with Burnley, happen at Old Trafford. Always happens. Burnley's a bogey team. But you were speaking my language that I can't reiterate this point more. Also, just one other thing in terms of it leaves one decision out. because you have so much to think about week on week. It just leaves that one decision away in your head. That's all. I like that as well.
Yeah, and the reality is, if the goalie gets injured, you replace him next game week. It's as simple as that. So yes, you lose out on it may only be like 1 or 2 points that week. Who knows? So I think it's an easy thing to do.
Right, so let's move on to the defenders. You've got Robertson and TAA at the top of your list. You've got a couple of West Ham guys. But I found it interesting that you had the likes of Cancelo there. I think, like you said, he's a bit of a rotation risk, and Reece James. These are these sort of defenders you usually like to monitor?
I like to keep them on the watch list because it's good to see what minutes they're getting, and if they're becoming more established than maybe what you thought. So I like to keep an eye on them because at the end of the day, I'm aware of the upside that someone like Cancelo or even a James can give you. Equally, Chilwell, I mean, I'd hope he's rotated slightly less with Alonso, but who knows? And yeah, definitely these sorts of players, they're playing for good teams that are defensive or at least have a good defense. And they're likely to go forward and get the odd attacking return as well. So if they were playing a decent number of minutes, they would definitely be getting quite a high amount of points. So I have them on the watch list just to see what's going on and keep an eye on them.
Just to be clear, Tom, by watch list, you mean actually the watch list function on the FPL website.
Yeah.
You add them to the watch list.
Yeah.
That's because it's something General does as well. And while you're making your transfers, is that what you use? You look at the watch list only, looking at the numbers, etc.?
A mixture. So quite often I probably would look at them at the watch list, but yeah, sometimes I'll look at the main thing just to see if there are players that suddenly got a load of points that I didn't even notice. Sometimes someone unexpected, someone pops up and you're like, oh, okay, how did he get that? It might only be he's on 30 points or something and all your other defenders are on 70, but still, if he's popped out of nowhere, then you might have a look and see what's going on with him. But yeah, generally, I'll try to use the watch list quite often. And the problem is maxing it out. I generally have so many players in there that then I max it out and have to take other ones out.
So do you
find that very interesting. I plan on using that this season.
So I'm curious, do you usually rotate your defenders? Again, what we were talking about in terms of goalkeepers, a lot of people like to have 2 rotating pairs of 4.5s, players that play according to fixtures. People like what I prefer through the years, I just like to pick 3 players, usually from these premium defenses, like your Man City, Liverpool, Man United, and stick them in for a period of 15, 20 weeks, irrespective of fixtures.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I might be more in that way of thinking this season, but I think it depends on the prices and what's going on with each player when I assess the players. I mean, yeah, definitely. I wouldn't say I leave them in for that length of time. I do like to look at runs and try to bring defenders in for different 5 or 6 game runs. So I think I looked back at my stats and actually compared to quite a lot of other people, I was moving my defenders around quite a lot. And that's not really because I'm necessarily rotating them. Like, I don't really like the 4.5 rotation thing. Again, I think you end up with missed points sometimes, and it's hard to predict necessarily who's going to get the points in which game. But I do like trying to identify fixture runs and saying, okay, this player, he's got 8 games there. I can bring him in and hopefully benefit from that, and then I'll flip him to a different 5.5 as an example. So if I was starting with Luca Dean and then I'm thinking, okay, James looks a bit more secure for Chelsea and they've got a great run, I'll bring him in. So that's the kind of way I play it. But I rarely, other than maybe someone like a Trent, I probably don't look to keep them in for 20 games. Trent and Robertson, I think, are a bit different. Trent and Robertson are so good in terms of offering both the defensive, hopefully the defensive points, obviously not last season so much with the problem with Van Dijk, but generally they're a top team. They should offer good defensive points in terms of clean sheets, but obviously they have the attacking threat as well, and they're secure. That's the difference compared to your Cancelos and your Jameses and your Chilwells, etc. They're going to play. So those two are a bit different for me. And I guess I would be happy to build my team somewhat around those, because you can, what's the average for Trent over a season? Probably about 200, 195, something like that over the last 3 years. Robertson, probably about 180, 185. It's pretty high given the price. And at the end of the day, they're not premiums. I'm never going to captain them, but they're there in terms of value. If I'm comparing against, say, some of these 7.5 forwards, or even some of the 7.5 midfielders, I feel more, I have more certainty with those two than I would probably some of the other players that we have on this watch list.
Just for the benefit of the listeners, I'm just going to read out your watch list, and there's a little bit of an error at the bottom also. So this is his watch list. He's got Robbo, Trent, Cresswell, Ruben Dias, Chilwell, Cancelo, Dunk, Stones, Soufal, Shaw, Digne, James, and at the bottom 5, the names that are repeating actually, the list is Ayling, Tierney, Reguilon, Fofana, and Lamptey. So yeah, any of these names that some of the dark horse names that you have a strong and you think could do well? I found it quite interesting that you had the Spurs defender in there. You think Nuno's going to sort that defense out, or he's just in there for the watch list?
In there for the watch list, see what happens. Are they going to play a 5? In which case, are we going to see, Reguilon move further forward? Maybe, I don't know. Is he going to go back to Doherty? Maybe. He was good before for him, so maybe he goes back to him on the other side. But yeah, at that price, if they were attacking like he had his fullbacks do for Wolves, then it's an option. It's a little bit expensive for me, if I'm honest. If they were like at 4.5, I'd be a bit more interested, but at 5, feels a bit expensive. But yeah, really just for the watch list, because I have no idea how he's going to shape his team.
Got it.
That's interesting. Sorry about that. I think I managed to delete a few names of this list while I was editing the file. All the 4.5 defenders got deleted. We just repeat them again, Ella, just for the sake of our listeners again.
Okay, I'll just repeat them very quickly. I have the Excel in front of me. Ayling, Tierney, Reguilon, Fofana, and Lamptey.
I think Ayling, Lamptey, and Fofana are very popular amongst the 4.5 defenders, especially.
Yeah, and out of those, Lamptey is my favourite by quite a long way. I have to say, it doesn't matter what the price is. I like my defenders to still have some kind of attacking threat. And Fofana, while I appreciate he is quite good value, he just has no attacking threat at all. And he's going to get the odd clean sheet, but it doesn't excite me in any way. I'd rather go with Lamptey. I mean, he's ex-Lively. So just really hope that turns into some goals and assists. So, I mean, obviously there's a lot of open questions with him. Is he going to be back from his injury? Is he going to be playing in the same way? Is he going to get enough minutes? We don't know for sure. It's a difficult thing at the start of the season, but yeah, if there's any indication that he's looking good, then I would favour him above the other 4.5s. And the highlighted ones are the ones where I feel I'm most likely to put in my team, I guess. So, sure. I mean, I don't think we need to say too much about him. The stats from last year were superb. I know his total wasn't actually that big. I mean, what did he get in the end? 124 points. Surprisingly low. He only played 2,600 minutes. He probably plays a bit more this time. Obviously, there's concerns if he's had a rib injury during the Euros. Is he going to be back for game week 1? I'll have to monitor that. But if he looks like he's back, then I like him a lot.
Right. Should we move on to the mids now? I think you've got Fernandes and Salah as your must-have picks. I don't think we really need to talk much about them. But what price would interest you for Sancho if he comes in and convinces you to go for him over Bruno?
I'm not sure. I think he's going to be fairly expensive. And I've seen people talking about 10.5. I'm not sure how appealing that is compared to a proven asset like Bruno. I mean, I appreciate the lad's good and he was great in Germany, but we've seen that before. So, I would probably want to see how he fitted in. See, one, where was he playing exactly? How does he work with the other Man U players? They've got quite decent players up front, but I don't know how that balance is going to work. And equally with Bruno, I've got him, but that's an easy swap to De Bruyne or somebody else, probably De Bruyne, let's be honest. So I have him. I appreciate that if you take away the penalties, it's not so great. His stats are not that brilliant if you take those away. I mean, I think last year he had 10 penalties and scored 9. I mean, is he going to get 10 penalties again? Obviously, changing the rules, got quite a few penalties early on, given the rules as they were at the time. I'm not sure if he's going to get 10 penalties. So I feel like his score could be a bit lower this year. I guess having Sancho in the team, that might benefit him. Better players around him, may get into the box a bit more. But yeah, be interested to see the lineup. But Man U have got good fixtures early on. I'm willing to just go for him. De Bruyne, we don't know if he's back from injury. I think I'll probably go that way. And then I think Man City have some really good fixtures around game week 8 or so, 8 to 11 or something. So that may be the time to move. And I'm already kind of thinking about things, wildcard time, maybe game week 7, Chelsea, Man City, great fixtures. Could be the good way to play it.
Outside of Rafinha, in the budget brackets, who do you like? A couple of midfielders you fancy?
Havertz is interesting. Little bit expensive. Like to see the minutes. Buendia, I like 6.5. Obviously, looked decent in the Premiership before, and has moved from a team that would struggle to a team that I think will be mid-table and that on its day looks very good. Sarr's interesting, given what I heard from your guest last week. So I'm not sure about him. I think he may be on penalties. Yeah, I don't know. They seem a bit more defensive, so that puts me off a little bit. Outside of that, Gundogan's always a decent player, but I don't know. Again, the formation, where De Bruyne's playing, etc., has a big impact on that. And I guess Grealish I love, but 8 seems quite expensive now. If you have a Buendia at 6.5, I'd be interested to know where the set pieces go in that team. If Buendia has the set pieces and is played in a similar role to Grealish, even if he's not as good as Grealish, at 1.5 million cheaper, then I think that seems like good value.
Are you prepared to, what's your thinking when you see a fixture like City against Norwich pop up in game week 2? It's like, one good fixture in the sea of 3 to 4. Are you prepared to just ignore that and just go ahead, look to captain somebody else?
Probably. I don't think you can move around that much, but it's worth thinking about whether you bring in a Man City player. But like we've already said, I mean, which Man City player? I could probably bring in some of their centre-backs, but I don't think that's what we want. So I don't think Diaz is going to, smash it against Norwich. So that's the problem. If De Bruyne's back, I guess he would be the obvious one. But, Foden, Mahrez, I mean, they're great, but who's going to play? Torres is in everyone's thoughts as well. He's 7. He's not even on the list. He played a decent, not decent, 1,200 minutes or something last year, but he's another cog in the wheel. You don't know what's going to happen with him. So that's just the problem. And so you could end up bringing a player in that doesn't even start the game, plays 30 minutes, and then loads of people want to sell him the next game.
That's sort of my fear with Tony as well, right? And now let's transition to the strikers. Who do you say right now would be your top 3 strikers on your watch list? I know you've got a bunch listed here, but who would you say are your top 3?
So I think Kane's too expensive, 12.5, 2 million more than last year. Seems a big jump. Even if the guy's superb, goal machine, obviously if he goes to City, it changes everything. But outside of that, Bamford, a little bit concerned about Rodrigo, is it? Yes. I mean, he could come in. He did well at the end of last season. Bamford was getting taken off at 59 minutes. It's not great. Watkins, I like. Calvert-Lewin, I like. Woods, solid. Had him last season. Got a 20-point haul. No, he's not for everybody, but...
No, we love Chris Wood. I think you listen to our podcast.
Just for the jokes, yeah. Yeah. But yeah, 7 million, fair price. Wilson, 7.5. I mean, there's a host of these players that were 6 or 6.5 million last year. So they've all gone up quite a bit. So it makes it fairly difficult. But if I'm going to pick 3 players, I'd pick Watkins for the early fixtures, and because you know what you get with him. He's a very solid player. I'd pick Antonio, because I absolutely love the guy. I think he's an absolute beast. He can just plow through defenses. Very, very strong. Great player. Great stats. Obviously, you never know when his hamstring's going to go. But you just have to be prepared that if you have him, you take him out at that point. So he is definitely one that I really like. And I think they've got good fixtures at the start as well. Iniacho, I like. Little bit unsure about. They've brought in some good players, Leicester. That's the problem. They've got Maddison coming back. They've got Barnes coming back. They've got this Daka guy. There's a whole host of good players they've got at the club. And I don't know. I kind of presume that in the end, Iniacho would replace Vardy as almost like a one up front. But in the meantime, are they going to play two up front? Or are you just going to get maybe two, but then Iniacho gets taken off after 60 minutes, 70 minutes? It could be Vardy, given his age. But there's a lot more unknowns there. So I don't think I'll start with Iniacho, but good player. And he was on fire at the end of last season. So interesting one. Jimenez, you never know if he's going to come back from his injury. Really concerns me that his aerial threat was one of his biggest traits. And now obviously he's wearing that hat. And, you don't know how that's going to affect him mentally. Tony, I'd like to see him first. He scored an absolute packet full in the Championship, but can he carry that on at a higher level? Hard to know, but Brentford sound like they'll be quite attacking. Added Pookie just for, well, he was there a few years ago. Pookie party for a few game weeks, wasn't that at the start? But yeah, outside of that, Abraham would be good if he got a move, 6.5. If he went to somebody reasonable, mid-table team, 6.5, be very reasonable. So, and Calvert-Lewin, I'm in an iron about. I think he's got good fixtures. I just don't know how they're going to play. And I don't know what the impact of Richarlison being at the Olympics for the first few games is going to have on him. I mean, is that better because he's guaranteed to be the central striker, or is that worse because basically one of their best players is not in the team? So, not sure. Obviously, some of their midfielders may go, not play. So there's a bit of uncertainty around them at the moment. So he was one of the ones that I was very interested in, and I've cooled my interest recently.
Yeah, this is difficult with the new managers. Right? I think this becomes very similar to the policy you have with new players, new transfers, with new managers. It might be initially better to wait and see how they bed in. So let's actually now switch into your draft. This is not a team reveal, by the way. This is just a draft Thomas sent us with his initial thoughts on the players he have together. And I'm just going to read this out. And after that,
Before we do that, I just want to touch on the strikers.
For sure.
What's your thinking about? I just wanted to talk about Oba at 10 million. And are you interested at all, given Arsenal are not playing any European football this season?
I find it difficult to know where he's going to play, to be honest. Is he going to play on the wing? Is he going to play up front? Lacazette's still there. Are they going to buy another forward? Obviously, you've got some other interesting players that are hanging around. Some of the youngsters are really good. Smith-Rowe, Saka. I just think there's too many unknowns. If it ends up with him, the main man, every week, 90 minutes, then yes, I guess he's decent. 10 million's a lot, though. For that uncertainty and compared to some of the other...
It's the cheapest he's been in this game, in his tenure in FPL, though. Before last season, he's been a 20-goal season striker. There's just something to think about. But I think Arsenal are going to be the surprise package this season, because I think they were having issues dealing with Europe last season, and I don't think they're going to have Europe this season, and it's going to be a starting 11, I reckon, and I think that's going to make a big difference in terms of how Arsenal plays. So it's just in my head the team to watch out for this season, I reckon.
Yeah, it'd be nice to see how they set up, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Always traditionally given us good FPL options as well. So I'll be hoping that Arsenal will come back.
Yeah, the mixed fixtures to start with. They have Brentford, which is a good fixture, obviously, and then Chelsea, Man City in 2 and 3, and then Norwich in 4 with Burnley and Spurs. So I think first 3 weeks you could probably monitor them.
And then Gameweek 4 is a good time to jump on, if at all.
Yeah.
I think that's probably what I'm going to do, right? So let's talk through Tom's team. He's got in goal Sanchez. It's a 4-4-2 system with Dean, Shaw, and the Liverpool fullback double-up. I'm not surprised after the reasons you mentioned. I'm quite convinced on that myself now. Rafinha in midfield, that is. Rafinha, Fernandes, Salah, Buendia, and Brownhill. And up front, he's got Watkins and Antonio. On the bench is Foster, Lamptey, Brownhill, and the legend, that is Keenan Davis. I'm glad to see that you're a fan. Tom. So let's start. I think we'll skip the goalkeepers. We'll just skip to your defense. I think we've spoken about Shaw and the fullbacks at length. Tell me you're thinking about Dean. How convinced are you on him?
I was really convinced. I think he's underpriced. Obviously, last year, I think he was 6, went up to 6.1, 6.2. I think we know what we get with him. I think he obviously is usually on a lot of set pieces, but I'd be really intrigued to see how they set up. If he is in a wing-back position, and in particular, if maybe Rodriguez goes and he's going to be on all the set pieces, I think his appeal goes up quite a lot. If he's just playing as a bog-standard fullback, and maybe on less set pieces, then maybe he's not as undervalued as I initially thought. But one to keep an eye on. He's in the team at the moment, but not completely sure.
What would you be looking to see? So sorry, Ella. What would you be looking to see in previous season to give you that? Would you be looking at how far forward he's getting? What would be the indicators you're looking to tilt your decision either way?
I'm hoping he's either on quite a lot of set pieces or he's getting forward and getting crosses in for people like Calvert-Lewin. So that you feel, I mean, he got 9 assists last year, good total. I don't think he started particularly well, so I think he was better in the second half of the season. But he's a player actually that has potential to get a few goals as well. I think he was maybe a little bit unlucky, takes some free kicks. So I think he has the potential to get maybe in the area of kind of Robertson of like 180, 170 points if things go well for him. But I think it does depend on how he's been played. So if he's bombing forward down that flank, he's obviously very effective. But if he's asked to defend a bit more, then I'm definitely less interested.
Got it. Ella?
Have you played 4 at the back before, Tom?
Usually, my favourite formation is 3-5-2. I also appreciate a lot of people like 3-4-3. It just really fits the personnel at this point and seems a little bit less risky than some of the other options. And look, I'm not by any means absolutely convinced by this. And I'm still thinking of those other formations. There are still other players, and there are obvious benefits of playing the other formations. One being with this formation and having the dud up front, you have Davis, who's going to get you a 1-pointer at best. Obviously, if you play a third forward, you're more likely to then have another 4.5 at the back, who is, there's obviously a lot more choice there of players that are going to play and that maybe, have the possibility of getting you a clean sheet that game. So
yeah, I think you'd worry about that. Having 4.5 million outfielders, that would be the prime worry with this formation.
Yeah, Lamberty I think he's a good option. Brownhill is a 2-pointer. I know he scored a couple of goals against, I don't know who it was, but scored a couple of goals in midweek, but I don't think you could read too much into that. He's a 2-pointer really. And then the third one is, I don't think you can put too much on him at all. So definitely that's a drawback with this formation.
I think it's fine for the early weeks, right? When you don't see as much rotation, you don't need your bench as much. I think that's fine. So I see Rafinha on your team, who's obviously a very popular option. Are you looking at him more as a long-term pick, or as we've seen Leeds' initial fixtures, I'll just read them out here again. It's United away, Everton at home, Burnley away, and Liverpool at home. Not the best. So do you think he can deliver points, or just somebody you believe is a glue pick? You set and forget for a number of weeks.
Yeah, well, you somewhat put me off from that fixture list, but I think the concern here is that you get too many players where you've got a planned transfer.
Exactly.
So I've already got Buendia, I've already got Watkins. You could argue that Villa's fixtures are very good the first 3, and then maybe you'd look to move them onto somebody else. In particular, Watkins, you'd feel a bit more happy about having longer term. Buendia, maybe you'd want to move on to someone else. If I go instead of Rafinha with someone else who might be questionable, it becomes a bit too much, and I'm a bit worried about the balance. So I guess that's why I have him in. And I do think he's the sort of player that can get returns against anyone. We've kind of seen that. I know his ceiling isn't that high. I think he only got 1 double-digit return last year, but he got, a lot of solid returns, and his average, if you look at his points per minute, it's pretty good. So I think he's a solid pick, and I think at 6.5 he offers quite a decent amount of value. But I can appreciate why some people may, want to start with somebody else who's maybe got better fixtures and then plan a transfer. But I think if just with my team, if I do that with too many, I get a bit concerned.
That was going to be my next question about Buendia and Watkins, because again, we'll just go back to the fixture ticker for Villa. After the first three, they played Chelsea, Everton, and United. Do you plan to keep one or two? What's your plan with those guys?
So Watkins, obviously, there's a host of 7.5 options, so he can easily be moved on. And funny enough, he'd probably be the one that I would least consider moving on, just because I think he's very solid. You've got guaranteed minutes. I kind of feel okay, even if he had some fairly decent fixtures. I mean, think what he did to Liverpool last year. So, that doesn't concern me so much, but there's obviously different options. I mean, I think Wolves have got great fixtures from game week 4, but I said I'm a bit concerned about Jimenez. Is he going to be back? But at least we can see by then if he's looking okay. Maybe a move to Iniacho, maybe a move to somebody else. But there are other options. If Tony's setting the world alight, you can move down to Tony. So that, there's a few options for him. But Dia is a little harder. So there are options, but that is another concern I have with the structure. The price point there, if I decide, or if someone like a Jota, someone like a Havertz really goes crazy at the start of the season, someone like a Foden looks like they've got guaranteed minutes, it's quite hard to get to that 7.5, 8.5 price bracket. So then I'm needing to find 2 million. I mean, I guess the natural move then would be to drop Robertson down and move to a different defender, go to 3 and try to then upgrade. But it's not something you can do in one move. So that is another factor to consider, really.
Right, let's just move down up top. I noticed you liked Antonio. He's also on my initial list. Are you worried about the Europa League once that kicks in?
Lost off. I can hear you again now, Zoff.
Sorry, great. I'll just repeat myself. So Antonio, I like him a lot also, but my concern with him is the Europa League. Once it kicks in around game week 4, I think they really need to sign another striker. And in general, I worry about West Ham's ability to cope with, a Thursday, Sunday schedule every week. So again, Antonio, is it someone you're looking to hold as long as his hamstrings last, pretty much?
Antonio is definitely a concern for those reasons. We've got his hamstring and his injury record, and the fact he gets often taken off after 75 minutes is one thing. With the Europa Cup, that's another thing. So it will be interesting to see if they add depth. I mean, I've been seeing recently that maybe there's a rumor that Liverpool are interested in Bowen.
Yes.
But so that would be, that's not the way they want to go. So are they going to bring a number of other players in? Does that then, would you be concerned about the minutes? Would that then mean that they might play 2 up front? I mean, hopefully they just bring someone in and that they can play in the Europa Cup, and then Antonio can concentrate on the league. That would be perfect. But until we see what happens, it's very hard to know how that will end up. But yeah, definitely. I mean, I love the guy. I think he's got great stats, but there's always concerns with him, unfortunately. And look, you could go easily to a more safe pick like a Wilson, and it may be the thing that I end up doing. But I just really love Antonio. I think he's brilliant.
That's fair. Ella, anything to ask?
No, I think we're good. I'm just given a full rundown on the team. Great thoughts on all the players in the watch list. So I'm pretty good with what we've had.
Yeah, the Liverpool fullbacks are really tempting me. What I'm just monitoring is the situation with Firmino. If Firmino returns late to preseason, I'm hoping Jota could get the first 2 to 3 games, and that creates a bit more of that flexible price point you're talking about, having that 7.5 mid rather than the 6.5. So I think that's something I think what I've seen here, you're really looking to capitalize. I see the Liverpool triple up. I think that's a fixture play. You've gone with the Villa double up, which is also obviously a fixture play. The United double up. So you're attacking the fixtures, I think, early on. You're not afraid of the double ups, triple ups, and stuff like that. So I can understand what you're doing here. Very cool.
All right. So any other questions, Zoff? Or I think we can wrap up now.
I think it's going to wrap up. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on, Tom. We'll definitely get you on again during the course of the season as well.
For sure. And also, just before we end, I wanted to give a shout out to the guys who've been helping us a lot with the graphics. So I just want to credit and thank Aman and Falgun from Caravan Pictures, who have created the amazing intro, which has received a lot of love from everybody. So thank you guys. And also to Simon, who you will find on Twitter at Falco FPL, for helping us with all these thumbnails, etc. And he's helping us with the template and designed pretty much throughout the season. So thank you guys. We really appreciate the help you've given us. And don't forget to like and subscribe, because that really helps us grow the channel. And that's it from us for this week. We will see you probably around Monday with a pod on defenders. Bakar will be back with us and we'll be discussing defenders in depth. Thank you again, Simon, for being with us. And
Tom.
we're sure we're going to have you later in the season.
Not Simon, Tom.
Tom, sorry. It's not a pod without me having one brain fart, right?
Wonderful, Tom. Thanks for bearing with us all through the tech errors. We had a lot new tech today. Once again, pleasure having you on, and good luck with how the season starts.
Cheers, guys. Thanks a lot for having me on.
Pleasure. Thank you, guys.